Today's daf, we're going to be learning a Sanhedrin daf tzadi. Today's daf is sponsored by Rachel Savin in loving memory of her father, Shalom ben Shmuel, on his third yahrzeit. Okay, there's a study guide for today. It will be helpful for the first half of today's daf. What we're going to do today is we're going to finish the 10th parak and move on to the 11th, very interesting chapter. Okay, we are going to start with the topic. And by the way, Rabbanit Ifi Clymer is back up with her shiurim. She was on a break for a while, and her first set of shiurim are going to be on the death penalty, a very interesting topic. I know it's a topic that has concerned everyone about what's this idea of capital punishment and all that. So she started with starting within the Tanakh and going through historically the death penalty in general. So the first set in the series is up already. If you missed it last week, you can check it out. And Daf Mishalahen is on Tchiyat HaMetim, which is going to be the topic for today. Okay, let's get started. We have this topic that we ended with yesterday. We were kind of quick at the end of yesterday's daf, but we talked about a Navi Sheitiach. We have a Navi who basically sways people to worship idols. Okay, and we had a big machloket. I'll read you the psukim a little bit. So we're going to start in Dvarim chapter 13, okay, verse 2. If there's a person who claims to be a prophet and gives you a sign, okay, an ot or mofet, sign like something, that shows they have power. So they say the following thing's going to happen, and in fact it happens. And then they say, okay, now I've proven I have powers, meaning I'm coming, I have signs from God. Let's go worship Avodah Zarah, okay? And then they say, obviously, don't listen to this person. They're not telling the truth, and etc. And then it says in the last pasuk, this is the one we're going to darshan in pasuk vav. This is the one actually we darshan yesterday, though we didn't see it inside. Hanaviyahu oacholem chalamahu yumat. They will be killed. That was why the rabbi said chenek, because it's just yumat, stam death. Ki diber sarah al Hashem elokechem. Sorry, I said it wrong. That's Rabbi Shimon who said chenek. And then it says, right, because he said this terrible thing against God, who take you out of Egypt, lahadichacha min haderech. He's tried to sway you from the path. Pay attention to these words. We're going to darshan them. Lahadichacha we darshan yesterday. That's the gzera shava that they made from there. That the rabbi said, oh, it's skila, because by mediach it says, right, a mesit tries to sway people. It says hadacha, and there it's skila. Also here it's stoning. Min haderech, from the path, asher tzivcha Hashem elokecha, that God commanded you, lalechet ba, to go in that way. Ubiar tara mikarbecha, and you'll get rid of evil in your midst by killing this person. Okay, so we have a basic machloket. Is it stoning? Is it Now we're going to have a machloket between Rav Chisda and Rav Hamnuna, two Amoraim, about the machloket Tanaim, about which case this machloket is. They have this machloket chenek skila. Is it in any time where somebody tries to sway people to go against a mitzvah? Which mitzvot? Is it only idol worship? Now from the psukim, it sounds like only idol worship. So let's read. So I'm a Rav Chisda, last three words in Pei Ted and Bet. Machloket be'oker haguf de avodah zarah. B'kiyum miktzat ubitul miktzat avodah zarah. According to Rav Chisda, the machloket is only about idol worship, as seems from the pasuk. But idol worship in two ways. Either they could say completely, you should worship idols. There's no such thing as, there's nothing wrong with idols, or this is not an idol at all. Or they say, well, partial. Like, for example, we're going to see an example later. Do it today, but don't worship it tomorrow. Okay? Or something partial. Derachman Amar, how do we get the partial? We get the total, because that's really what it said in the pasuk. Derachman Amar min haderech, va'afilu miksat haderech. Okay, this min haderech. Oh, whenever you say min or mi, from, meaning not the complete thing. So even if it's not complete, because remember they said liyadichacha, they're trying to sway you from the path. From the path means even if partially off the path, and that would be partial. Something's partially avodah zarah. Aval. But category 2. Shar mitzvot. What about other commandments? According to Rav Chisda, shar mitzvot, that has nothing to do with this pasuk. This pasuk has nothing to do with that. Divrei hakol b'chenek, everybody agrees chenek. Why chenek? So Rashi tells us this comes from a different pasuk. Dinaftalami krachrina comes from a different pasuk in a totally different parsha. Dichtibe hadacha, where it talks about someone swaying something else, with someone else to do something. Achanavi asher yazid davar b'shmi, that we quoted yesterday. A Navi who says intentionally something in my name, which isn't true, like don't do a mitzvah, okay, that would include that. And it says, Umeta Naviyahu, and that Navi will die. And any die, right, is usually just chenek. So In that case, everyone agrees chenek. And kiyum mitzvah v'itul mitzvah di b'shar mitzvah. What if they tell you partial mitzvah yes, partial mitzvah you don't have to keep? Well, that's divrei kol patur. There's no death penalty for that. Okay, and that's because why we're gonna see later that davar means right that asir yazid davar b'shmi. Davar is a complete davar and not a partial. Okay, so of course it's not allowed to do that, but you won't get the death penalty for it. Okay, so I'm going to pull up the just find it here. Okay, here's the chart. Okay, so Rav Chisda, we have avodah zarah on the one half, shar mitzvot on the other half. I highlighted in yellow where we're going to have a machloket. Everything else that's not in yellow, there's no machloket. Everyone agrees with that between Rav Chisda and Rav Hamnuna. Okay, but first we're on Rav Chisda. So if it's avodah zarah, whether you're getting rid of the whole thing or partial, skila chenek debate, the debate we saw yesterday. Oker haguf of shar mitzvot from a totally different pasuk, it's chenek. And that pasuk does not include a partial, and therefore you're completely exempt from shar mitzvah. Mativ Rav Hamnuna. Rav Hamnuna says, how could you say the pasuk that we saw about avodah zarah isn't talking about shar mitzvah? If you, I know I pointed out those words, but let's read them again. What did this person do wrong? Ladi chacha, they tried to sway you min haderech. Asher tzivah Hashem lokecha lalechet ba. What does it mean? That God commanded you to go in that way. Well, that's unnecessary, those words. So Rav Hamnuna says, lalechet zo mitzvah taseh. Ba zo mitzvah lo taseh. Lalechet is to go do something. That means that it must be a reference to doing a positive commandment. Ba, in this way and no other way, is telling you there's also a negative commandment. So don't, right, whether they're uprooting a positive or a negative. Now, this still could be avodah zarah, but comes from Hamnuna and he says, there is no mitzvah aseh to do idols, right? There's nothing positive to do when it comes to worshiping idols. So therefore, he says this pasuk must be also referring to other mitzvot, which we're going to have an aside right now. How's Rav Chisda going to explain that? What do you mean? Of course, there's a positive command when it comes to worshiping idols. We are commanded to destroy their altars. So there you have a positive commandment, and therefore you can say it's referring to that. Now, Rav Hamnuna says, here comes Rav Hamnuna's explanation. If Rav Hamnuna thinks that pasuk is referring to all mitzvot, what about all mitzvot? Well, when we had it before, we said the pasuk was referring to avodah zarah, both getting rid of the entire thing and even partial. That's only by avodah zarah. But when it comes to shar mitzvot, we're going to say it's only if you completely uproot a mitzvah. Okay? So, machloket o keraguf, bein ba'avodah zarah, bein b'shar mitzvot. So the machloket is when you're getting rid of the entire thing, whether it's avodah zarah or whether it's shar mitzvot. And kiyum mitzvah bitul mitzvah avodah zarah. Derachman amar min haderech. Now min haderech is still referring to avodah zarah. So there it was referring to avodah zarah. When it says lalechet ba, it brings in other mitzvot, but there it didn't say partial. So when it comes to other mitzvot, it's only completely. And right, val kiyum mitzvah bitul mitzvah b'shar mitzvot divrei hakol patur. But he agrees actually with Rav Chisda that when it comes to kiyum b'mitzvah and bitul b'mitzvah of all other mitzvot, you're exempt. So again, to do a good summary, we basically have that Rav Chisda and Rav Hamnuna agree about everything, that the pasuk is avodah zarah, either completely or partially, and there we have a machloket, because once we say that pasuk is talking about, we have that basic machloket. Hadacha, do we do a gzera shava, or is it chenek because it says who will die? That's referring to that. And when it comes to kiyum mitzvah, bitul mitzvah of all other mitzvot, for sure you're not. No pasuk is referring to that. But the machloket is, what if you're okay with the goof of shar mitzvot? Which pasuk do we learn it from? Do we learn it from a completely different pasuk, and then it's just chenek because it just says umeit? There's no hadacha there. Or do we learn it from this pasuk because of la lalechepa, which includes other mitzvot, and then you would say there's a machloket. So that's their machloket. Now what we're going to do is we're going to take a braita. Okay, I'm going to try to keep this whole thing up. You can see almost all of it at once. We're going to take this braita, and we're going to have to read. This braita doesn't seem to work according to anyone. And then Abaye, who holds like Rav Chisda, is going to read it like Rav Chisda. And Rava, who holds like Rav Hamnuna, is going to read it like Rav Hamnuna. And again, and this is why I specifically arranged it in the chart, you can see, okay, here's Abaye and Rava, that there's only one area in this braita that they're going to disagree about, because there's only one case they disagree about, which is oker guf of shar mitzvot, uprooting completely a different mitzvah. And that's going to be the first thing on the other, right? And the other sugya it was later. We started with avodah zarah, went to shar mitzvot. And this braita, we're going to start there and then get to all the things that they agree about. Okay? So here's the braita first. We're just going to read the braita, and then we're going to try to explain it according to all the opinions. Tanu Rabbanan, haminabela akor davar min haTorah chayav. Okay, if you prophesize to uproot something from the Torah, it doesn't say what, you're liable. L'kayem mitzvadu levatel miktzat, Rabbi Shimon poter. If you said, though, to be Makayim part and get rid of part, right, then Rabbi Shimon exempts. Now, I want you to remind you, everybody exempts, and this is for shar mitzvot, obviously, because not an avodah zarah. Uba'avodah zarah, afilu omer hayom ivdua lemachar bitlua divrei kol chayav. When it comes to avodah zarah, even if they said, today do it, tomorrow don't do it, meaning partial, everyone agrees you're chayav. Okay? Now, what do they say you're chayav? Remember, everyone says you're chayav. It's just a matter of, is it skila or is it chenek? So Abaye savar like Rav Chisda, mutaritz like Rav Chisda, and Rava savar like Rav Hamnuna, mutaritz like Rav Hamnuna. So Abaye holds like Rav Chisda and therefore explained the braita according to Rav Chisda, and Rava holds like Rav Hamnuna and therefore explained it according to Rav Hamnuna. So now we're going to go one by one and see how they read this braita. So I'm going to move it so that you could see almost the whole thing all at once here. Abaye savar like Rav Chisda, mutaritz like Rav Chisda. How? Haminabela akor davar min haTorah divrei kol b'chenek. So remember, we're going to assume minabela akor davar min haTorah here would be, because he thinks there's a different shar mitzvot and avodah zarah. So this one must be if we say chayav, and everyone, it sounds like everyone agrees. So the simplest way to understand, and it must be talking about, and also it makes sense because the kayem mitzvah levatel mitzvah is obviously going to be shar mitzvot. So this must be shar mitzvot, and chayav must mean divrei kol b'chenek, right? That's what he said. Rav Chisda said, "Okera guf of shar mitzvot is b'chenek." So minabel akor davar min haTorah is any mitzvah, and chayav means chenek, and it means everybody agrees. It didn't say who said chayav, right? The only time it mentioned the name was, it's actually interesting. In the second one, it said Rabbi Shimon is poter. In the third one, it's in divrei kol. Everyone agrees. But here we're going to have to say it's also divrei kol because there's no other way to say it. There's no debate here. L'kayem miktzadu levatel miktzat Rabbi Shimon poter. Now, this is strange because what do you mean Rabbi Shimon poter? Everyone is poter, remember? Both the rabbis and Rabbi Shimon said you're patur. And even according to Rav Chisda and according to Rav Hamnuna. So both of them are going to have to say here, v'hu adin l'Rabbanan, meaning even Rabbi Shimon exempts, but everyone exempts, really. It's Rabbi Shimon and the rabbis as well. Again, it's a hard reading of the braita because that's not really the way it sounds, but there's no other way to read it. And then when we move in the second part of the braita to avodah zarah, b'avodah zarah though, afilu amar hayom ivdu al bitzluah chayav. So now how are we going to explain this? Now what do you mean chayav? Everyone agrees chayav, but what did we see? Everyone agrees chayav, but according to both Rav Hamnuna and Rav Chisda, one says skila, one says chenek. So we're going to say everyone agrees chayav, markaditle or markaditle, each one in their own way. Everyone agrees chayav. It's just one says stoning, one says strangulation. Rava, okay, that was all how we explained the braita according to Abaye. Now again, only the first one we're going to have Rava have to explain differently. The second part and the third part are obviously going to be the same because there's no debate between them. So Rava savar like Rav Hamnuna, mataritz like Rav Hamnuna. How? So if you're going to uproot something from the Torah, now here it's going to be whether it's avodah zarah or whether it's shar mitzvot, because again, according to Rav Hamnuna, look here. If you're okera guf of avodah zarah, kiyum mitzvah bitul mitzvah, or okera guf of shar mitzvot, because remember he said that pasuk was referring to shar mitzvot, it's the same debate, skila chenek. So he can already read in this first line, if they're trying to uproot something in the Torah, whether it's avodah zarah or whether it's anything else, chayav. But markaditle or markaditle. But they all agree that chayav, but each one in a different way. One says skila, one says chenek. L'kayim miktzad u'levatel miktzad b'shar mitzvot Rabbi Shimon poter v'hu adin l'Rabbanan. Right, that's the one about partial other mitzvot. Everyone agrees patur. So again, Rabbi Shimon exempts and also the rabbis. And the last part, avodah zarah, kiyum miktzat bitul miktzat, afilu omer hayom ivdu al machar bitzluah chayav. Everyone agrees chayav, but according to this one, it's going to, right, same thing as before. L'chachamim b'skila, markadile or markadile, each one in their own way, whether it's skila or chenek. Okay, so again, in a simple way, the easiest way to review this is really just to look at all the things that I highlighted in yellow. which is, right, the Oker Haguf of Shar Mitzvot is where they have a machloket. Is it just chenek, because it's learned from a different pasuk, or is it chenek or skila? So when the braita says, "Amin abela kor davar min Torah chayav," according to Rav Chisda, you would have to say everyone agrees chayav and it's b'chenek and it's only Shar Mitzvot. And according to Rav Hamnuna, you would say it's both avodah zarah and other mitzvot. And when it says chayav, it means everyone, but each one in their own way, either skila or chenek. Okay, that's the whole sugya there. Okay. Amar Rabbi Abaye, Amar Rabbi Yochanan. We're going to have a little bit more about this sugya though. Bakol im yomar lecha navi avor al divrei Torah shmalo chutz me'avodah zarah. Okay, if a navi tells you go against the Torah, like Eliyahu and Har Carmel, and said go sacrifice those sacrifices outside the temple because I'm going to make a showdown with the Nevi'ei Abal, you have to listen. Okay, and that's why the Torah specifically brought psukim. This is back to saying, look, those psukim only seem to be talking about avodah zarah. But when it comes to avodah zarah, even if they show you the biggest sign and they make the sun stop in the middle of the sky, you can't listen. Time. Now another braita with a machloket between two people about how to understand this pasuk. Rabbi Yossi Aglili Omer, Higia Torah lesof da'ata shel avodah zarah. The Torah realized how much people are enticed to worship idols. Lefichach natna Torah mem shalaba. This is an interesting line. It's hard to understand exactly what they mean. There's different interpretations, but we'll go with the simple reading that it sounds like God gave a navi, okay, like a false prophet who's trying to entice people, power to actually make a sign, to test the people. Even if right now, the assumption is you can't make the sun stop in the middle of the sky unless God is on your side and helping you with it. So why would God help? Well, it must be to test the people or something like that. Al tishmalo, but even if they do that, don't listen to them. Okay, in other words, it could be God will give them the power to do it, but your job is to know and be smart enough to say, wait, that's avodah zarah, I can't do that. But Tanya Amar Rabbi Akiva, he says, what are you talking about? There's no way God would help people who are trying to convince others to worship avodah zarah and stop the sun in the middle of the heavens. So what could this possibly be referring to then? Why would someone be able to make a sign? You could have someone, we saw Hanan yesterday, who prophesied falsely. So we could say it could be someone like him who was a real prophet and maybe proved a sign came from God while they were a true prophet. But then they weren't anymore. And don't believe them now to go worship idols if they showed you some sign before, even though they might have been a true prophet earlier, doesn't mean that they're a true prophet now. Like we saw yesterday with Abraham and Eliyahu at Har Carmel, since they already had a track record, they're believed. But not if they told you to worship idols. That would be something different. Okay. Last section for this parak, Zomemei Ba Kohen. We go back to that case and we're going to review something that we already know. Minan and Mili, where do we get it from? That remember, what punishment do they get? Chenek. And not the punishment of Shreifa, which she gets. Rabbi Ika Titani. Rabbi Yossi Omer, Matam Lomar Vasitim Lo Kasher Zamam La'asol Achiv. Why does it say they do what they get the punishment they tried to do to their brother? When it comes to any other Eid Zomem for a riot, you have a father and daughter, the father and daughter get the same punishment, right? All those arayot we saw. It's all the same punishment for both people. There's only one exception to that rule. Bak Kohen he b'streifa ve'ein bo ala b'streifa. But only the Bak Kohen, she gets streifa, and the one who has relations with her does not. So zomemim eni yodel im lo hukshu im la hukshu. So there is the only case where we have a question. Get like her or get like him? And from there we learn to the brother and not to the sister. And that's really our lead into Mako, which should be coming right now. And in fact, in the Mishnah, that's the next Mishnah. Okay, because in the Mishnah, chapter 10 is really chapter 11. And chapter 11, here's in our Gemara, is actually chapter 10, both in the Mishnah and in the Yerushalmi, which begs the question, obviously, why is this? Okay, this is, first of all, let's just give an intro to the parak. It's called Parak Chelet. In fact, you might know the Rambam has a very famous Hakdama, the Parak Chelet, which is all about Ikarei Emunah, we call it, the fundamental tenets of our belief. Chiyat HaBeitim and Yimon HaMashiach and Olam Haba and all that, and he defines what all those terms are. He talks about Sachar Va'onesh, and he says, don't be childish about it. It's not all about getting prasim and, getting prizes and all that. Very famous work of the Rambam that's very widely read. This is a chapter that's really, it starts off, Kol Yisrael Yesh Lam Chelek Olam Haba. Everyone has a place in the world to come. But then immediately it's going to say, oh, but some people don't. Okay. First of all, right, it really means everyone potentially does. Okay. Just some people might lose their part. It's interesting that it doesn't start with Elu she'en lem chelek lo'olam haba, because like Elu aniskalim, Elu anisrafim, Elu, and then we're going to get into Makot. Elu hein Elokim, these get lashes. Elu hein hagolim, these are the people who go to the Ir Miklat, the refuge city. But presumably they didn't want to start with the negative of these are the people that don't have a part in Olam Haba. And I think they wanted to stress that really everyone can come into Olam Haba. Okay, again, how we define Olam Haba, we'll see these terms are going to also be used in different ways sometimes, okay, even though you might want to try to define. In fact, the Shansin has a good introduction where they go through what all the terminology is. But even there, it says some of this terminology is used sometimes to mean one thing, sometimes to mean something else. Okay, we're going to talk about resurrection of the dead. That's going to be the main topic for today. Safrai had a good, so first of all, why does the Bavli move it? Okay, it really is its own chapter in and of itself and a whole different type of genre. You'll see it's all Agadata and a different type. It makes sense to kind of put it at the end. Okay. But the Safrai has a good, in Mishnah Eretz Australia, has a good explanation of the whole thing here. He says the purpose of this chapter is to define the difference between Jews who are sinners and Jews who are removing themselves from the Jewish community. Okay, saying we're not really Jews, right? You could be a Jew and be a sinner. Okay, you can sin. I mean, people sin. It's just what happens. And you still consider yourself Jewish. But these are people that are really kind of considering themselves not Jewish. They're taking them out of the main tenets of belief. Okay, that's like an interesting way to look at it. And I think also you can, what's going on here is we had all the capital punishments, right? If we go back to the Rabbanit Yafid is going to talk about the whole capital punishment thing. It's talked about under Shiur, right? There's all this capital law, which in the end, we basically don't really do. Okay, we haven't yet gotten to the Beit Din Ratzchanim, that's going to be in Makot, but like a murderous court if they murder one in every 70 years, right? But they didn't really do it. Safra actually says he has a whole different attitude about it. It's not just that they're trying to limit the death penalty. He actually says that he claims that Sanhedrin describes a utopian state where we have complete control over we're in charge and therefore we can do capital punishment. If we're not in charge and there's other governments ruling over us, then we can't necessarily do capital punishment. And then this is actually a utopia to be able to do capital punishment. That's an interesting theory. You have to think about it. But I would like to believe it's not really utopian to do that, but okay. But what you can think about here is we talked about this a lot yesterday. I think it's almost like an intro to this, even though again in the Mishnah the order was opposite. But then we talked about there's people who get punished b'dei Adam and people who get punished b'dei Shamayim. And this is really right. We talked about the 4 death penalties that the court can do. And now we're going to get to the punishments that God does, right? That are in the hands of God. So that's also another way to look at it. Okay, with that, let's get started. Enough introduction. We want to get through the daf. You'll see these dafim are very long. I'll just be warning you because they're agadatod. On the other hand, it's a little quicker to go through, but they are long. It takes time. Kol Yisrael yesh lam chelek la'olam haba. Every Jew has a portion in the world to come. Shneimar va'amech kulam tzadikim. The whole nation are tzadikim. Kulam la'olam yeshu aretz, and they can inherit the land. Here we mean olam haba. Netzer mata'ayim aseh yadai litpaer. Okay, they come from God. They're like the shoots that come out, and they're maaseh yadai. They're my maaseh yadayim litpaer, and they can glorify me, or to be glorified. But these are the people, okay, so even though we said everyone has a portion, but there are people who will lose that portion by doing something. And that's the one we're going to deal with today. If you don't believe that there's resurrection from the dead from the Torah. In other words, okay, now, the whole question is going to be, where does it say resurrection of the dead in the Torah, right? There's no pasuk that says there's resurrection of the dead in a very clear manner, okay, but we're going to find 6 different sources. They're going to try even more, but we're going to have 6 that seem to work, at least today. We'll get to 6 of them. For resurrection of the dead from the Torah. Someone who doesn't believe, okay, we're going to go through the rest of this list quicker because we're going to deal with them further on. The Gemara is going to go into them later. But if you don't believe Torah comes from the heavens, okay, the Torah is written by God. Apikoros. Okay, apikoros is a whole term that could include a lot of different things. The Gemara is going to go through what's included there. Rabbi Akiva Omer, apikoros farim chachitzonim. Okay, if you read books that are on the outs, okay, what are the books that are on the outside? We're going to again see what books are we talking about, like philosophy, certain philosophical books. Okay, if you have a wound and you do an incantation, it's kind of like a witchcraft kind of thing. But if you do it in such a way, we're going to see right now. And you read this pasuk, okay, right? Whatever I put on you in Egypt, I won't put upon you because I'm God, your cure. But you use this while you do some magic kind of incantation. That's like a disrespect to God. If you say the explicit name of God, the Shema Meforash, Shlosha. Okay, so those are people that don't get a section of the world to come. Those are categories of people who do certain things that puts them on the outs. Now, there's Shlosha Malachim, 3 kings, V'arba Hedyotot. Now we're going historically. There were certain people who we know about. And again, we'll get to them when we get to them, so I'm not going to go through all these people now, but Shlosha Malachim Yeravam, Achav, U'Menashe. Rabbi Yehuda Omer Menashe yes lo chelek lo amaba. What do you mean Menashe? First of all, he was the one who was determined in his time. He was close toward like the last slew of. He was the son of Chizkiah, last slew of Malchei Yehuda. He was determined in his time that it was too late to go back, and the Churban was going to happen. The destruction was going to happen. God kind of said it at that time. But Rabbi Yehuda says, what do you mean? He did have a chelek because he said Shneemal vayitpalel elav. What happened was the Assyrians brought him into Babylonia, sent him to Babylonia, and then it says he davened there, and then he goes back to be king again. So you see, he came back. He did tshuva. Amrulo, no, okay, the rabbis retort to Rabbi Yehuda, no. He got back to be a king, but he didn't really get back. He still lost his chelik in olam haba. Arba'a hedyotot, Bil'am, Doeg, Achitofel, v'Gechazi. Okay, those are the 4 hedyotot who lost their chelik. Again, we'll get back to them. So now the Gemara says, V'kol kach lama. So we're really talking about Tchiyat HaMetim. If you deny Tchiyat HaMetim, why do you lose your portion of Olam Haba? And here we're going to see where they kind of blur the distinction between the lines, because what they're going to say is, of the definitions of these things, Tanahu kafar b'Tchiyat HaMetim, lefichach lo yeh lo chelek b'Tchiyat HaMetim. Okay, it's midah keneged midah, as we say. We'll read that inside in a minute. He denied that there'll be resurrection of the dead, and therefore he will not be resurrected. Now, it's not exactly resurrected. He won't get chelek la'olam haba, but it basically means he's denying that there's any life after death. And because he denies there's basically life after death, basically that person is not going to get life after death. Okay. Now, how do we know this? Because God works measurement for measure. How do we know this? Well, the Amar Rabbi Shimon bar Nachmani, Amar Rabbi Yonatan. How do we know this? We're going to read a story in Elisha. Elisha the prophet said, "Vayomer Elisha Shemu Dvar Hashem, Ka'eb Achar Se'as Sola B'Sheka V'Satayim Solim B'Sheka B'Shar Shomron." Basically says, right, there was a drought, and then he says the prices are going to drop. There's going to be tons of food in the market, prices are going to drop, and everything's going to be good. Uchtiv Vayana Shalish, and this person said to him, Asher Amelech Nishan Al Yado, this person, the king, messenger of the king, said to Ish Elohim, Vayomar, Hina Hashem was so Rubo B'Shamayim, what, does God have windows in the heavens and it's just going to drop food down? Is this possibly going to be? Now, what's the midah keneged midah? If you don't believe God's going to do it, then you won't benefit from it. So that's exactly what happens. Vayomer, Elisha says to him, you're going to see it happen with your own eyes, but you're not going to be able to eat from it. And in fact, turning now to Amabet, Uchtiv, what in fact happens? Vayiloken, and that happened to him for your Mesua to Ha'am Bashar Vayamot. And he got trampled in the gates and he died. So now they say, so where do you see? Midah keneged midah, he didn't get to benefit because he didn't believe it. So they say, what do you mean it was, Elisha Garmale. Maybe it was the curse of Elisha that did it, not God. It wasn't God's hand doing it, but maybe it was because Elisha cursed him, and that's why the curse came true. How do we know this? If a chacham gives a curse, even if it was not supposed to be a curse, it was an inappropriate curse or something, it actually comes true. So maybe it just came true, but it wasn't what God really wanted. It just came true because Elisha said it. To which the Gemara says, should have just said they trampled him and he died. But my bashar, it says they trampled him in the gates. But the word sha'ar, and this is tricky in translation, sha'ar also means the price in the shuk. So now they're going to say, why was he trampled? Al iske sha'ar. If they didn't need to tell you where he was trampled, but he was trampled anywhere. What's the difference where he was trampled? They specifically made a reference to what Alicia said, the prices in the shuk are going to change. He was trampled because of the prices in the shuk, because he denied them. And that's why it added that word b'sha'ar to teach you it was midah keneged midah, and that's how we learn midah keneged midah. Okay. Now we're going to start with our attempt to find a source for Tchiyat HaMetim from the Torah. With that, we'll get off on a bunch of tangents. Amar Rabbi Yochanan. This is going to take us till the end of the daf, this topic, okay, and it's going to even continue. Minayin l'Tchiyat HaMetim min HaTorah, shenema v'netatem mimenu et Tchumat Hashem la'Aaron HaKohen. A very odd pasuk to learn Tchiyat HaMetim from, you're going to see. So you're supposed to give the truma, right? The truma goes to the Kohen. So it says in the pasuk, to Aharon the Kohen. Now, what's the problem here? V'chi Aharon la'olam kayam. What? The Torah commands you give it to Aaron. Now, Aaron's not alive all the time. And not only that, you only give truma when you're in the land of Israel, and Aaron never made it into the land of Israel. So he was never going to get truma anyway. So what did it say that you're going to give it to Aaron Kohen? You're going to give it to Aaron Kohen when there's Tchiyat HaMetim. And from there you see, Mikan l'Tchiyat HaMetim min HaTorah. And that's your source. So, debate Rabbi Yishmael Tana. We're going to see, okay, there's different braita in the house of Rabbi Yishmael. They darshan this totally differently. They don't think Aaron Kohen means Tchiyat HaMetim, that he's going to live. La'Aharon ke'Aharon. And now we're going to get off on a total tangent about this halacha he talks about. You give it to a Kohen who's like Aharon. You don't actually give it to Aharon. You give it to someone like Aharon, meaning Ma'aron chaver, not because Aaron was a Kohen, you give to anyone who was like Aaron the Kohen. No, like Aharon specifically, who was a chaver. Ma'aron chaver, afanav chachim. What's chaver? It's the opposite of an Ama'aret. You can't give truma, according to this, to an Ama'aret's Kohen. And you think that might seem unfair. What are the Ama'aret's supposed to live on? But we're going to see in a minute why you can't give to a Kohen Ama'aret's. Amar Rabbi Shimon bar Nachmani, Amar Rabbi Yonatan. We're going to now go off on this topic. Minayin she'en onim truma l'Kohen Ama'aretz shenema. Okay, now we're going to bring a different source for this. Okay, so we have one source because it's to Aharon. It has to be like Aaron. Here's a different source. This is a source from Divrei Yamim. It says there, "Vayomer la'am yoshvei Yerushalayim." So they said to the nation living in Jerusalem, "Latet manat l'kohanim u'leviyim," to give a portion to the Kohanim and the Levites, "L'man yachzeku b'Torat Hashem," in order for them to strengthen themselves in the Torah of God. So what are they darshan from here? Only one who goes in the way of the Torah, the way of God, gets it, a portion. And those who don't. And that's his way of darshan again. But it still doesn't really explain why. So now we're going to start to learn what the issue is. It's like giving it to a lion. What does this have anything to do with it? Well, we're going to read like this. There's two different ways to understand this. I'm going to go with one interpretation. Ma'ari safek dores v'ochel, safek eno dores v'ochel. When a lion, okay, either might, okay, there's two ways the lion could attack. Could attack and eat the food immediately, or it could attack its prey and then leave the food till it rots and then eat it. Now we start to understand the problem. If you give it to a Kohen Ha'aretz, he might leave it till it becomes impure, or he might be impure and eat it while it's impure. In other words, he might not treat it in the proper manner, just like the lion might let it rot before he eats the meat. So he might actually eat it while he's impure or while it's impure, and that's a problem. So it's almost like a lifnei iver lo titein mechshol. Don't put a stumbling block before someone. We're going to see in a minute that you could even get the death penalty for doing that. We've learned that already. Rabbi Yochanan Amar, af gorem lo mitah, even causes him to die. Shenemar u'meitu bo ki yachalalu. So don't give them truma because they might not treat it properly, and then they might actually cause their own death. Rabbi Lezer ben Yaakov Tana, af besio avon hashma, you even cause a guilt sin, a guilt from a transgression. Shenemar, that says in the pasuk, besio tam avon hashma ba'ochlam et kodshehem. Okay, that they got this avon hashma by eating their kodashim. There's another pasuk which basically associates this word hashma, guilt, with eating sanctified items improperly. So again, you're causing a problem to someone to sin. Okay, that was a total aside because they didn't learn it from that pasuk like Rabbi Yochanan did, but some people said otherwise. Second source for Tchiyat HaMetim. Tanya, Rabbi Shimon אומר, מנין לתחיית המתים מן התורה, שנאמר, וגם הקימותי את בריתי איתם, לתת להם את ארץ כנען. This is what Moshe says to the people. He says to them, I establish my brit with them to give them, or Moshe says to, right? Is it God saying to Moshe? It's the quote. I can't remember now whether it's either God had quoted it to Moshe, Moshe says it to the people, or hey, either which way. The words are what's important here. I established the brit with them to give them Eretz Canaan. Now, who's going to get Eretz Canaan? The fathers? No. So now they say, okay, thanks, Ruth. It's God to Moshe. Lachem lo ne'emar ela lahem. Mikam l'tchianu mitim min Torah. It should have said, I'm giving, right? I'm establishing my brit with them to give you Eretz Canaan. Because I made a brit with your parents, you're going to get Eretz Canaan. But it doesn't say that. It says they're going to get it. But when are they going to get it? Must be in the future. This is the same concept as before, right? That because it says something's going to go to someone who's actually going to be dead when that happens, it must be they come back to life. Okay, now we're in the context of this next discussion. There's a siman for four things: tzedek, gam, geshem, kam, which are the four simanim for these four arguments. We're going to have these arguments. This is like we had this back in Sanhedrin Lamed Tet. We had these vikuchim between either tzdukim, meaning right heretics, others between them and a rabbi, where we have these arguments, and we're going to claim one thing, and they're going to say, "What are you talking about?" And particularly, it makes sense that they're arguing over things like resurrection of the dead, which again, usually these people are trying to bring psukim, and we're trying to bring psukim, and they say it's not what the pasuk says. We have a different interpretation. So we're going to have four arguments here, four cases, and I think we're going to see one, two, three. I guess we'll see four today. There's another one. I don't know. I guess we'll see. Shalut stukim et Rabban Gamliel. I didn't pay attention to what exactly these simanim are for, but we're going to see a bunch of these arguments. So the Tzdukim asked Rabban Gamliel. Okay, some people have kutim, some people have Tzdukim, whatever. How do we know that God resurrects the dead? He pulls out, I could bring you three proofs. One from the Torah, one from the prophets, one from the writings. But they didn't accept any of his proofs, though we'll see the last line is going to be until he said the following one. Okay, but the first three they don't accept. So I'm not going to count these in our count of how many proofs we have. We're going to end with 6 today. So far we saw 2. We have the Aaron and we have the give them the land. Dichtiv, Vayomer Hashem Moshe, Hincha shochem avotecha bekam. We're now at the end of Sefer Dvarim. God tells Moshe, you're going to die. And then he says, and you're going to get up. What do you mean you're going to get up? You're going to be resurrected. Amrulo, they said, you totally took that pasuk out of context. Vidilma v'kam ha'ama zevizana. Okay, if you look at the pasuk, it's Dvarim 31, verse 16. Hashem says to Moshe, you're going to die. And when you die, the people are going to go and they're going to worship idols. Okay, so basically the kam is relating to the people, not to Moshe. Mina neviim dichtiv yichyu meitecha nevelati yikumun hakitzu v'rananu shochnei afar kitala rotalecha ve'eretz refaim tapil. Okay, here's a pasuk from Yeshayahu, which says the dead will be resurrected. Yichyu meitecha. Okay, nivelati yikumun, their dead bodies will come up. Hakitzu v'rananu shochnei afar, those lying in the dust will rise. Kitala recha talecha, your dew is like, right, it's going to resurrect everybody, bring them back to life. And eretz refaim tapil, and the land will basically spit people out. Okay, so there you have it. So they say, Dilma mitim shechayeh Yechezkel. Maybe Yeshayahu was not referring to in the future the resurrection of the dead. He was saying in the future, meaning at some future time, in a one-time event, somebody will resurrect the dead. What was that? That was Yechezkel, who brought back to life those dead bones, right, in Yechezkel Lamed Zayin. And maybe he was just referring to that one time, because remember, Yeshayahu lived before Yechezkel. So he was just saying, oh, there'll come a time when this will happen. But he's not talking about resurrection of the dead in general and in the future. Minak tuvim, dichtiv. Remember, this is what the Tzduki or the Kuti or someone, this whatever this was, is telling Rabban Gamliel. So minak tuvim. So Rabban Gamliel tries a third one. Dichtiv. V'chikech kiyen hatov holech lidodi lemesharim. Right, your palate is like good wine. Okay, blah blah blah. Dovev siftei yeshenim. It will make the lips of the dead wake up. So the lips of the dead will wake up. What does that mean? If not, so they say, you might remember this pasuk. Maybe their lips are just going to move a little in the grave. It doesn't mean they're going to arise from the dead. How do we know? Rabbi Yochanan Mishum Rabbi Shimon ben Yotzadak. Okay, if you remember this, if someone quotes a halacha in your name, your lips move in the grave. What it really means is you're still somewhat alive because your words are keeping you alive, but you're not really alive. You're in the grave. There's no resurrection of the dead. And that could be learned from that pasuk. And therefore the Suki says, that's not a good proof. Until he brought finally this pasuk, which is actually very similar to the previous pasuk that we brought, the proof number 2 of Rabbi Simai. It's just a different one. This is from Shema, the second paragraph of Shema. God promised, God swore the fathers to give them. Again, you have the same thing with giving them. It's just a different pasuk. Okay, and that proof works. The fourth is Yeshomrim. Some people say that wasn't the one that Rabban Gamliel used a different one. And from where we get to number 4, Yeshomrim and you who are cleaving to God are alive, all of you today. Now, what does it mean alive, all of you today? You're alive. Why do you need to say alive today? So they say, okay, I'm not reading the words that by me appear in parentheses. Okay, just like you're alive today, you will be alive even in the world to come. And that's another possible reference to Tchiyat HaMetim. Okay. Second, vikuach. Okay, the arguing between someone and a rabbi. Shalu Romi Yimit Rabbi Yoshua ben Chananya. So the Romans asked Rabbi Yoshua ben Chananya, Minayin Shekadosh Baruch Hu Machayei Metim v'yodea ma she'atid liyot. They ask him 2 questions. How do you know that God resurrects the dead? And how do you know that God knows what's going to be in the future? Amar lahem. Travayim in a Makrase says you get them both from this pasuk Shneimah. Vayomer Hashem Moshe Chash Shochem Avatecha v'Kam Amazev V'Zana. So we have Chash Shochem Avatecha v'Kam. That was the one we saw before, and v'Kam Amazev V'Zana, and the nation will get up and leave. So that shows that God knows what's going to happen in the future. So they say V'Dilma v'Kam Amazev V'Zana. They say to him, no, right? The Romans said to him, what do you mean? V'Kam doesn't have to do with Moshe. V'Kam has to do with what's going to happen to the nation. So you can't prove from there Tchiyat HaMetim, to which he says, at least half of what you asked I proved. To Yodea ma she'atid liyot. In other words, this is like when you get someone in a game, like either which way they go, you're going to get something, right? So basically you've trapped them. You trap them by using this pasuk, because either if you don't accept one explanation, then at least you accept the other explanation, which means that God knows the future. So he basically got that one, but not Tchiyat HaMetim. Itmar Nami, and it was also said, Amar Rabbi Yochanan Mishum Rabbi Shimon ben Yochai, Minayin Shekadosh Baruch Hu Machayei Metim v'yodea ma she'atid liyot, Shneimar and Chash Shochem Avatecha v'Kam. Okay, and again, this pasuk can really prove both, but again, to prove both, you have to read it in 2 different ways. You could, but certainly the Romans didn't want to accept that. Okay, Tanya, Amar Rabbi Eliezer Rabbi Yossi. Okay, another braita. B'davar zeh ziyafti sifrei minim, shayu omrim ein Tchiyat HaMetim min haTorah. I basically ruined the books of the Minim who claim that there was, we'll see in a minute what that means, who claim that there wasn't Tchiyat HaMetim in Torah. Amar to them, Ziyaftem Toratchem v'lo heletem biyadchem klum. In other words, it seems like he's saying, at least some of the commentaries say, they changed their books, they forged their books, they changed lahem to lachem. And that way they could prove, oh, look, there is no Tchiyat HaMetim, because it's to you and not to them, the fathers, from going back to those 2 proofs we had before. So you say Shatem remains Tchiyat HaMetim in Torah, but Harei Omer, he says, but I have a different pasuk, and now we're getting to source number 5, and this we actually learned, although a little differently. The second part of the sugya is going to be what we already learned about this. Harei Omer, when it comes to someone who curses God, that's what we learned about this. He karet tikaret hanefesh hahi avona ba. Okay, that soul will be wiped out. We'll get karet, double language, note it, but avona ba, his sin will be upon him. So now they say. He kareti karet ba'olam hazeh, avona ba le'imat. If he kareti karet means olam hazeh, then avona ba for when? If you're going to get cut off from this world, so what does it mean you still have a sin upon you? You're dead. What kind of sin do you have upon you? Lav lo olam haba, doesn't that prove that there's olam haba? Okay, because if your sin is still upon you, it has some meaning down the road. There is a down the road. Amalei Rav Papa Abaye, v'le'emalu travayim mi kareti karet. Our Papa says, why don't you just learn from hikaret to karet, the double language? He could have said hikaret ba'olam hazeh, tikaret lo'olam haba, which is actually what we learned when we learned it last time. So they say, no, the reason why he didn't use that proof was because inu have amrele, they would have said to him, dibra Torah l'shon b'nei adam. Remember this, right? The Torah just uses double language as a manner of speaking. It's not really a proof. So that's why he didn't use it. But now they say kitanai, because as we see in a machloket tanaim, Do we say it's just the way people speak or not? Hikaret, tikaret. Hikaret ba'olam hazeh, tikaret la'olam haba, divrei Rabbi Akiva. Rabbi Akiva darshans, remember, he always darshans everything. And therefore he thinks already from those two words you could get to olam haba. Amar lo Rabbi Yishmael, v'lo kvar ne'emar, Hashem hu megadef v'nichratav. But in a different pasuk it says it's because he cursed God and he will get karet. So now he's going to say, what? There's olam hazeh, olam haba in a third world? There is no such thing. So if you're going to say ikaret, tikaret, and nichrata, you're stuck. So, elav nichrata ba'olam hazeh, he karet la'olam haba, he karet, tikaret, dibrat rak l'sham b'nei adam. So nichrata is one, he karet, tikaret is two. You don't count he karet, tikaret, each is one. They both count as the second one together, and the Torah just used l'sham b'nei adam. And that's how we show what they could have claimed, l'sham b'nei adam, that's a machloket tanaim. But again, if you're arguing with someone else and they have that claim, they can always pull it out on you, better off not to use it. Now, what's the problem with this though? Bein Rabbi Yishmael, bein Rabbi Akiva, avona ba ma'avdebe. But clearly Rabbi Akiva and Rabbi Yishmael, neither one used this avona ba drasha. So what do they do with the words avona ba? Because they already learned either from nichrita and hikaret tikaret, or hikaret and tikaret, they already olam haba. What do they need avona ba for? L'chiditanya yakol afilu asat tshuva. So you might have thought even if he did tshuva, and now they say no, only if avonaba. If you do tshuva, then the karet is, then you basically get back your portion. Okay? Last question for today. Shalak Cleopatra Malkatat Rabbi Meir. Amra Yadana Dechaya Shachbe. Now here it's interesting. She's going to bring a proof. I know that the dead come back to life. How do I know that? Taftiv. It's a pasuk from Tehillim, and he says, right, they're going to be metzitz. Right, the ones who are sleeping are going to wake up, okay, like the grass. Ella, but she asked the following question: Kasheim omdim, but when they get up from the dead, omdim arumim or belivushehem omdim. She's kind of mocking it, right? They're going to have clothes on, or they're going to be naked. How are they going to rise up? Right, kind of making fun about the people who are born, right? They're born naked. What, the people who come back to life? They're going to stand up naked? Amarla kavachomer michita. I'm going to learn it from wheat. He says to her, machita shenikbara ruma. It's buried. And it's naked because it doesn't have anything on it. It's just a seed. And yotza b'kama levushim, but it comes out covered. Right? You can't see the seed even, right? Tzadikim shenikberim b'levushehem al achad kama v'kama. Tzadikim who have tachrichim, right? That's why we bury people with clothing. I don't know that's why, but we bury people with clothing on. Of course, the tzadikim are going to come out with clothing on. Okay, we're going to continue these questions into tomorrow's stuff. And for now, we have 6 proofs of tchiyat hametim from the Torah. That was basically we did the second part. And the first part of the daf, we dealt with the whole question is, we had the machloket Rav Chisda, Rav Hamnuna. Is the machloket Rabbi Meir and the rabbis just about avodah zarah, or is it also about someone who's okir davar mitzvah, complete mitzvah from the Torah? Will we have that same machloket, or is that learned from a totally different pasuk? And with that, we finish for today. Wishing everyone a good day.